The battle over voting rights is about to boil over in North Carolina. Late last night, a party line vote advanced a measure in the state's Republican-backed House that would make sweeping changes to when and how voters in North Carolina can cast a ballot. Both houses of that state's General Assembly are under Republican control for the first time in more than a century. Last month, the ink was barely dry on the Supreme Court's decision to strike down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act when the state of Texas began moving forward with plans to implement its voter ID law. In Philadelphia yesterday, Attorney General Eric Holder announced the Justice Department is taking action.
And today, I am announcing that the Justice Department will ask a federal court in Texas to subject the state of Texas to a pre-clearance regime similar to the one required by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We believe that the state of Texas should be required to go through a pre-clearance process whenever it changes its voting laws and practices.
And according to a McClatchy-Maris poll out today, a majority of adults, 53%, think discrimination in voting still exists in some areas and should be addressed by Congress. Joining me now for more on this, Katherine Culliton-Gonzalez, Director of Voter Protection at the Advancement Project. Kathy, thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you.
So let's start with these voter ID laws. They're almost exclusively being pushed and implemented by Republican-controlled state legislators who claim they want to combat voter fraud. But study after study have shown that voter fraud is virtually non-existent, and voter ID laws, they would only target impersonation fraud, which is even more rare. What do you think this is really all about?
You're absolutely right. There's, zero instances of in-person voter fraud in the states that are doing this. North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi. So what they're really about is finding ways to restrict voting rights for women, for people of color, for low-income people, and for the elderly who no longer drive, don't have a driver's license. And so it's politicians manipulating the right to vote, something fundamentally against the basic principles of American democracy. So I, for one, am very glad the Justice Department is taking action. It's a good sign for American democracy, and they need to use all of the tools of the Voting Rights Act that are available to try to continue to protect voting rights in the wave of voter suppression that we are experiencing here and now in our country, particularly in the South and Southwest.
Now, supporters of these restrictions say voting is one of our most important rights. It's something that needs to be protected fiercely, and that it's no big deal. You need an ID to get on an airplane, so why shouldn't you need it to vote? How do you think these measures will impact voter turnout in reality?
Well, we know for a fact that they can restrict voter turnout because, we know from the facts in the cases in the case in Texas, for example, almost 800,000 people don't have the very strict form of ID that the Texas voter ID law would require. So college IDs aren't allowed. Expired military IDs aren't allowed. Gun permits are allowed, and state IDs that cost time and money to get are allowed. So it actually kicks out about 800,000 voters with a disparate impact on Latinos and African Americans and the elderly, women, and the poor. So that's the impact of voter ID laws in Texas. Similarly, in North Carolina, about 31% of the people who don't have the kind of ID that the legislature would require are African American. 25% are senior citizens. And so, these are definitely ways that would decrease participation of the most deserving people. And again, here in America, at the ballot box, it's where we're all supposed to be equal. We're supposed to have equal access to the right to vote, no matter what our income or our race.
And turning quickly now to Holder's announcement that the Department of Justice will intervene in a Texas redistricting case, what other tools are at their disposal? What other steps do you anticipate the DOJ will take with these issues?
I certainly hope that they do similar interventions or bring litigation in these other states that used to be covered under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So the tool that they used is Section 3C of the Voting Rights Act. Litigation needs to be brought to bring the worst offenders under the program of preclearance that Attorney General Holder described so well. And that program of preclearance under Section 3C needs to be implemented through litigation. And so groups like ours, the Advancement Project, and many voting rights lawyers and the Department of Justice are looking at doing these types of actions in other states. And I certainly hope that the Department of Justice takes a close look at other states that have ongoing discrimination through voter ID laws and through similar forms of modern-day poll taxes and literacy tests.
And this is certainly a battle that is just beginning. Katherine Culliton-Gonzalez, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
It's not dozens.